Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Curtis Reeves? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case. I'll move to the timeline of the incident, then offer my analysis. In 1966, Curtis Reeves started working as a police officer in Tampa, Florida. He married a woman named Vivian in 1967. They would go on to have 2 children. The couple bought a home in Lutz, Florida in 1969. In 1970, Curtis was promoted to detective. He was assigned to the Homicide Robbery Bureau. In 1976, he earned a bachelor's degree in criminology from the University of Tampa. Curtis helped to create and lead a SWAT team. He was the commander of that SWAT team for many years. Due to some medical issues, Curtis left the SWAT team and was named the head of the bomb squad. He stayed there until 1993. Curtis then served as the director of security at Busch Gardens until 2004, when he retired. Curtis was involved in many stressful situations and interacted with dangerous individuals throughout his career, but he never fired his weapon in the line of duty. After retirement, Curtis continued to have medical problems like pain and stiffness in his joints. This takes us to the timeline of the incident. We move to January 13, 2014. At this time, Curtis was 71 years old. In the early afternoon, Curtis and his wife Vivian drove to the Cobb Grove Theater in Wesley Chapel, Florida. The couple entered the theater and stopped at the concession stand. They purchased popcorn and a soda. After this, they walked into movie theater number 10, which was playing the movie Lone Survivor. Curtis looked around to find a row that had multiple adjacent empty seats because he was expecting his son Matthew to arrive shortly and join them. They found an adequate spot to sit and started watching the movie previews. Right behind their seats was a low wall. Curtis sent a text message to his son telling him where they were seated. A man named Chad Olson and his wife Nicole were one row in front of Curtis and his wife. Chad was in the seat directly in front of Curtis. Nicole was in the seat directly in front of Vivian. 43-year-old Chad was a Navy veteran and a finance manager at a local motorcycle dealership. He was 6'4" and weighed over 200 pounds. Chad and Nicole did not know Curtis or his wife. They had never met before. The announcement came on saying that cell phones should be turned off. Curtis noticed that Chad's cell phone was still on. He could see the light from the screen. Curtis told Chad to turn his phone off. Chad ignored him. Chad's 22-month-old daughter was at home with a babysitter. His daughter was not feeling well. He was texting the babysitter to check on his daughter's status. Curtis told him a second time, threatening to report him to a manager. Curtis said that Chad responded by yelling obscenities at him. Curtis stood up and handed his popcorn to Vivian. He exited theater number 10 and walked to a service desk. He informed a theater employee that there was a person who loudly cursed at him when he asked him to stop using his cell phone. Curtis then returned to theater number 10, retrieved the container of popcorn from his wife, and sat down. According to Curtis, Chad stood up, turned around to face Curtis, and started yelling obscenities and threats at him. Chad was leaning over the back of his seat. His posture was aggressive, and his facial expression was consistent with anger. Curtis claimed that at this point, he saw the blur of a cell phone screen and then felt a blunt object strike his face, as if he had been struck with Chad's phone. Chad grabbed the popcorn container that Curtis was holding and threw it at him. According to Curtis, these two events happened just about at the same time. So he was hit with a cell phone and he was struck by the popcorn. In under a second, Curtis retrieved a .380 semi-automatic pistol from the front pocket of his pants, pointed it at Chad, and fired it one time. The bullet struck Chad's hand and Nicole's left hand ring finger. Nicole was trying to restrain Chad. Her left hand was on his chest. The same bullet continued and struck Chad in the chest. He would later die at a nearby hospital. Immediately after shooting, Curtis placed the firearm on his lap. an off-duty police officer walked up to Curtis and tried to take possession of the firearm. Initially, Curtis resisted, but then he allowed him to take possession of it. He sat and waited for the police. The police questioned him. He did not invoke his right to remain silent. Rather, he gave them a detailed account of what happened. Curtis Reeves was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. Over 8 years later, on February 25, 2022, Curtis Reeves was found not guilty. Now moving to my analysis. Even though Curtis Reeves was acquitted, many people believe that he was guilty. They are confused about the jury's decision. Let's take a look at the factors both for and against the idea that Curtis Reeves was guilty, starting with the inculpatory evidence. There was no question that Curtis intentionally shot Chad. No one is arguing that this was some type of accident. Therefore, what Curtis did was either self-defense or murder. Curtis made a claim that Chad struck him with his cell phone. However, Curtis actually changed his story a few times. In his last version, Chad threw the phone at him. According to a theater employee, when Curtis went to the service desk, he was angry. When he returned to his seat after talking to the employee, Curtis said something to Chad like, "I see you put your phone away." It's not clear if this was meant as provocation or if Curtis was simply noting that he did all that work to report Chad, and here Chad put his phone away after all. Video surveillance captured Chad grabbing the container of popcorn from Curtis and quickly throwing it back at Curtis. But it is impossible to determine from the video if Chad engaged in any other violent behavior, like striking Curtis with a phone by either having it in his hand and swinging his hand or throwing the phone at Curtis. There were several witnesses to the incident. None of them remembered a life-and-death incident as described by Curtis. None of them remembered Curtis being struck by a phone. Other than a mark on his eyelid, Curtis did not sustain any injuries during the confrontation. Curtis had years of law enforcement training, yet claimed that he had never encountered anyone exhibiting that level of uncontrolled anger and rage. This is nearly impossible to believe. What type of police officer was he in order for Chad to be the most dangerous person he ever encountered? Was he working for the Sesame Street Police Department? Like the most anger-filled confrontation up to that point was him breaking up a fight between Big Bird and Oscar the Grouch? Now moving to the exculpatory evidence. During a civil suit against the theater, Nicole Olson admitted that Chad was the aggressor. Chad did yell obscenities and he did throw popcorn at Curtis. The popcorn throwing portion was captured on video. Chad had a substantial size advantage over Curtis and was about 28 years younger. After the shooting, Chad's cell phone ended up between the legs of Curtis. This supports the idea that Chad used the phone to hit Curtis. If Chad was not out of control and violent, why did Nicole have her left hand on his chest? It really does seem like she was attempting to calm him down, trying to rein in his behavior. The wound Chad sustained on his hand was consistent with his hand being in a fist. Perhaps he was getting ready to strike Curtis. The theater was both loud and dark. It is possible that the witnesses simply were unable to see or hear the confrontation. In effect, they may not have been witnesses at all. When considering all the evidence, do I think that Curtis Reeves was guilty? In my opinion, I think he probably was guilty of second-degree murder in reality and beyond a reasonable doubt. I think the jury made a mistake in this case. In the state of Florida, a person is justified in the use of deadly force and has no duty to retreat if 4 criteria are met. 1, he is in a place where he has a right to be. 2, he reasonably believes such force is necessary to prevent death, great bodily harm, or the imminent commission of a forcible felony. 3, he did not initially provoke the use of force against himself, meaning he was not the aggressor. And 4, he was not himself attempting to committing, or escaping after the commission of a forcible felony. When looking at these criteria, I think Curtis meets 3 of them. He had the right to be in the theater. He did not initially provoke the use of force. Asking somebody to turn off their cell phone does not qualify as provocation. And he was not committing a felony. The problem I run into as far as his defense would be the second criterion. Did he reasonably believe that deadly force was necessary to prevent death or great bodily harm. Typically, flying popcorn does not constitute a deadly threat. We never see situations where an officer approaches a suspect and says, "Do you have anything on your person that could hurt me, like a gun, a knife, a needle, or popcorn?" Movie theater popcorn, with all the salt and butter, is probably more dangerous to eat than it is as a projectile. As far as the so-called phone strike, which I guess is an economical version of a drone strike, there's really no evidence to support this happened except for the phone being near Curtis after the shooting. It's possible that when Chad was shot, he simply dropped his phone, and that's where it ended up. What could have happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. As a high-ranking career law enforcement officer, Curtis became accustomed to being treated with respect. He may have also maintained a legalistic view of the world, which makes sense for a police officer. When the no cell phone announcement was made, Curtis expected Chad would comply. When he didn't, Curtis decided he was going to enforce the rules. Chad ignored Curtis. Curtis did not like being ignored. During his trip to the service desk and back, Curtis was getting increasingly angry. He was thinking about this high level of disrespect. Curtis had a premonition that pugnacious and pompous Chad would escalate the situation, which Chad did by propelling popcorn at Curtis. Curtis overreacted by killing Chad with a single shot. I don't think this case was really that close. I don't see it as one that was on the fence as far as reasonable doubt. But if it was, here's what would have pushed me over into the area of no reasonable doubt. When Curtis fired that shot, he knew that Nicole was touching Chad. He knew that he was endangering an innocent person. I find it hard to believe that Curtis was so overwhelmingly afraid that he would jeopardize an innocent woman standing next to a potential offender. The only way this behavior makes sense, in my opinion, is if he fired out of anger and a desire for revenge. Now moving to my final thoughts. Curtis Reeves was legally possessing a firearm. He had a valid permit for that weapon. When somebody does this, they take on a responsibility. Someone carrying a gun should always be the friendliest person in the room and the most willing to retreat from any conflict. A concealed carry permit is not for offensive action. It is not for settling fights or teaching somebody a lesson when they're disrespectful. Rather, it is a weapon of last resort when somebody's life is in grave danger. Anyone who carries a gun should always be of the mindset that they want to do everything possible to avoid using it. Curtis knew that he was angry at Chad. Curtis should have walked away. Those are my thoughts in the case of Curtis Reeves. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found this analysis as intriguing as a fight between Big Bird and Oscar the Grouch involving potentially lethal popcorn projectiles. Thanks for watching.